Patrick Cicero, Pennsylvania's consumer advocate. Let's get to know your office. What do you do to help and protect consumers?
Well, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I have the privilege of leading the Office of Consumer Advocate, the OCA, as we affectionately call it. The OCA is a statewide office that is housed in the Attorney General's office, and we represent the interests of utility ratepayers before the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. So whenever a gas, electric, or water utility comes in for a large rate case or any other significant proceeding of concern, our office looks under the hood, so to speak, to make sure that they're charging rates that are only fair and reasonable and not excessive.
Can you give us some examples of some battles you fought recently and you prevailed for consumers?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, we are kind of in the midst of a current case. The Pennsylvania American Water just filed a major rate case where there's about $204 million that they're seeking. That one's ongoing, so it's not clear whether we've prevailed yet, although there are ongoing public input hearings as we speak.
How about some past victories then? Just give us an example or two.
Absolutely. So recently we successfully advocated for the citizens of Philadelphia in the the Philadelphia Gas Works case. They had sought about an $80 million rate increase, and we were successful in getting that ratcheted down to in the 20s.
And how'd you do that? Tell us briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a host of experts that we consult with, either through contract or on staff. We present evidence and testimony about the actual needs of the utility as compared to the requests or wants of the utility. What the Public Utility Commission is trying to do is mimic competition because, as you well know, we don't have choice as to who our gas or water provider or electric provider is. They're monopolies. And so the Public Utility Commission tries to exercise some competitive restraint on those monopolies, and our office is there to kind of give them the evidence to ensure that consumer interests are represented.
How does your office latch onto an issue initially? How does it come to your attention?
Well, we're served with all proceedings that are filed at the Public Utility Commission. So by statute, we are a creature of statute. So we're part of that process and get served by everything. So our experts, attorneys analyze it, make recommendations to me. I ultimately decide whether we're going to intervene. That said, the public often brings lots of issues to our attention. So we have a call center, and issues bubble up from that. So those are issues that we know what to pursue when a given utility comes in for a case. And there are times where we actually initiate cases on our own. And I'll give you an example of that. We got a number of calls, both outreach from constituents and from legislators about service trouble in northeastern Pennsylvania because of problems with Frontier Telecommunications. And our office jointly filed, along with the Office of Small Business.
This was about phone service?
This is about phone service, yes. And our office jointly filed a complaint along with the Office of Small Business Advocate that resulted in a significant settlement with Frontier for them to invest up to $100 million of additional capital in that region to improve the quality of phone service as well as basic internet service protected by the Public Utility Code.
Talk about your involvement in legislative hearings. I'm guessing that part of your calendar is devoted to going to the Capitol and appearing in front of certain committees.
That's correct. So as the consumer advocate, I am the representative of consumers, and I've often called before the Senate and the House, the Senate Consumer Protection, Technology, and Utilities Committee.
You get a call from the chairman?
Get a call from the chairman, whether that's Chairman Matsey or Chairman Marshall, the majority or minority chairman in the House, or Chairman Stefano in the Senate, or Chairwoman Boscola. They're often interested in our office's perspective. And so in 2023, last year, I think I testified about 6 times collectively on a host of issues, whether it's affordability issues, water privatization, issues regarding community solar or how we generate our electricity, those sorts of things.
What's your process for getting hold of the data you need? And I'm imagining you make right-to-know requests at some point.
Well, we don't make right-to-know requests. We actually, because that is correct. I can't recall when the last time our office would have done that. What we do is when there's a case before the Public Utility Commission, we exercise our rights to discovery. So we ask interrogatories, we are enabled to do depositions, we ask for requests for admissions. We essentially are entitled as a party to that case to all relevant information And then, of course, we have our own expert witnesses do their own digging and investigation. And sometimes that requires on-site visits to water treatment plants or to wastewater treatment plants.
Oh, is that right? What can you learn from these in-person visits?
Well, I, as a lawyer, can't learn a whole lot, but our engineers who work with us can, learn whether or not they're, effectively using the most recent treatment facility, processes, et cetera, and looking to make sure everything's
assess them technologically to see how they're doing.
That's why we have a host of technical experts, not just attorneys and financial analysts, but engineers and others.
So here we are in a peak energy usage period. So we know energy bills are high. Of course, everything is. But how about the specific drivers for energy bills right at this moment? What's making it happen?
Well, there are a number of drivers, one of which continues to be the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has an effect on natural gas prices. The natural gas market is a worldwide market, not only because of natural gas as a global commodity, but because of our exports of liquefied natural gas. So as those constraints happen in Europe, which were really significant in 2021 and 2022, they eased up a little bit last year and are continuing to moderate. That has a significant impact. So does the weather, right? We came through this significant cold snap. Now, it's pretty moderate now, at least in Harrisburg, or typical weather.
Right now it's in the 40s.
Right. But we came through that pretty significant cold snap. That has a significant upward pressure on prices because there's a real joining of the way people heat their homes, which in Pennsylvania still is predominantly natural gas, and the way electricity is generated, which increasingly is predominantly natural gas. So we're using natural gas both for electricity generation as well as for a way to heat our homes.
Didn't know we were using natural gas for electricity generation.
Absolutely. It's one of the largest sources of the way we generate electricity in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's nuclear, natural gas, coal are the three biggest, and then we have some others, renewable. But natural gas is by far, depending on the day, the largest contributor of how we generate electricity in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
I'd like to get information out there that can help viewers appreciate what goes into their bill and how it's calculated. And I think it's worth talking about that electric and gas utilities, they don't own their own power plants and gas wells, do they? They have to buy energy like we do, but they sell it to us.
That's right. So we are a restructured state. I don't like to say deregulated. We are restructured. And so what that means is on the electricity and natural gas side, the company who has the poles and wires come into your house or the pipes coming into your ground, that's the local distribution company. They deliver, whether it's natural gas or electricity, to your home and get paid for that service. They don't own the power generation facilities or the natural gas generating facilities. They buy that on the wholesale market. And consumers have the right to shop for a competitive supplier, both on the electric and natural gas side. And about 30% of electric consumers and, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of natural gas consumers exercise that right. You also have the right to remain with your provider. If you don't shop, your local electric company and your local natural gas company will buy that energy for you at cost and pass it to you at cost. And they're supposed to buy it at least cost over time. So you have a bunch of options here in Pennsylvania. One is to go out and choose your own supply. One is to have the utility supply it for you. That's called default service or default supply.
Let's address a problem that sometimes a consumer have about paying their energy bills. Sometimes an energy bill can suddenly balloon up.
Yes.
And it turns out to be much more than you counted on. And is there any way to smooth out variations from month to month? That just sounds like it could be harrowing for some consumers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody likes surprise bills, whether they're surprise energy bills or surprise medical bills or any kind of surprise bills. And so I think the first thing that's important for consumers to know is to figure out what the cause of that is. When it's cold out in the wintertime or very hot out in the summertime, you would expect your cooling bill in the summer or your heating bill in the winter to be higher. But if that's not happened, if it's been kind of the same usage and there's some spike in it, you might want to look to make sure that nothing's going on. Did you switch to a competitive supplier and those prices are higher than you thought it would be? It's important to look at your bill. All that detail is on the bill. So it's important to diagnose the cause of that spike. But if after you've done that, we can get into any of that you want, but after you've done that, if you still think, I want to help smooth out this bill. So
that's the goal, let's say.
Yeah, that I don't have this fluctuation from month to month. Consumers have a couple of options. The one that we would recommend that's available for all consumers is budget billing. And what budget billing does is it takes a look at your 12 months worth of usage and kind of averages that out. So, there are times where you're paying more than you've used because you're smoothing out those prior months, and there are months where you're paying less than you've used because you're kind of banking those increases into the future. So what budget billing does is it looks at the last 12 months and averages out your bill and says, we're going to let you pay this average amount every month, irrespective of what you use, and they reset that every few months to make sure you're caught up. So it's a really good tool to help level out those winter heating bills as well as those summer cooling bills. That's available.
It sounds like in
regardless.
order to take advantage of that deal, consumers ought to pick up the phone and not just be satisfied with the status quo, which is the hills and valleys of billing.
It depends. I mean, some people quite honestly like the hills and valleys.
They do?
They do and here's an example of why. If you are a natural gas heating customer and you heat with natural gas, you might have higher gas bills in the winter but lower electricity bills.
Right.
And in the summer, you may have the opposite, higher electricity bills for cooling and lower natural gas bills. And so they effectively have budget billing on their own because they understand how to do that. But not everybody does that. Some people, as you well know, have limited amounts of income every month, and some people have limited ability to earn more of that, whether they're a Social Security or they're fixed income. They might just want a steady bill so that month in and month out they know exactly what they get. Budget billing is phenomenal for that, and I would always encourage customers to reach out to their utility if they have questions or concerns. Sometimes we get callers who say, well, I'm having a problem, but I didn't want the utility company to know. Trust me, they know. If you're not paying your bill or you're behind or it's a big spike, they know about it. It's okay to call them, and there are remedies and resources that they are required to offer you, and they actually do most of the time a pretty good job of doing that.
Required to offer you. That's an interesting aspect of this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're reaching out and you can't pay your bill, they're required to look at whether or not you're entitled to a payment arrangement, for example, which is different than budget billing. Well, budget billing would smooth out your bill and when you're not behind. A payment arrangement takes a past due balance that you may have and amortizes it or makes you pay your bill plus a little bit going forward. Every household, regardless of income, is entitled to at least 6 months of a payment arrangement, both from their utility and from the Public Utility Commission. Depending on your income level, lower income households are eligible for much longer payment arrangements than that to be able to spread out some of these arrears over a period of time.
Now, perhaps budget billing dovetails into what I'm going to ask you about now, which is just shopping for energy in general, and that can certainly have pitfalls where you end up paying more than you did originally. And what advice do you have for that situation?
Well, I think the first piece of...
Maybe it involves a contract.
Yes. Well, they all involve contracts, right? So anytime you exercise your right to choose an alternative electric or gas supplier, you're going to be into a contract with that supplier. So the terms of the amount of money that you pay are governed by that contract. They're not governed by the rules of the Public Utility Commission. Now, the Public Utility Commission sets marketing guidelines and disclosure statement requirements so that you're trying to get apples to apples comparisons between these things. But the biggest thing I recommend people do is to do their research. And there's a difference between doing your own research and having someone market to you. So there are two great sources of information that I really want to point people to. One is PA Power Switch and its companion site, PA Gas Switch. These are sites that are run by the Public Utility Commission on the electric and the gas side. And they look at all the offers. They have great filters that you can do if you want a fixed rate contract with no cancellation fees. And they're really stupendous for people who have access to the internet.
It sounds like a good way around a sales pitch. It's objective information.
It's absolutely right. It's from the Public Utility Commission. It is objective information. And all of us have probably gotten telephone calls or door-to-door sales, or we've been at the grocery store and we've seen a table set up with somebody trying to sell you energy. My advice to everybody is take the material. It may be a good offer for you, but don't make a decision on that spot. Don't make a decision if someone's calling you. Don't make a decision at your door, and don't make a decision at the grocery store about what your energy contract's going to be. Take that information, go back to your house, look at one of these sites, PA Power Switch or PA Gas Switch, or our office, the Office of Consumer Advocate, has shopping guides, both on the electric and gas side, that we can mail to you, or it's on our internet, on our website, and compare. Look at what has been marketed to you, what has been given to you, and see if that offer is as good as another offer you can get out there. when you're exercising your right to shop, you should be the one in control of that, not somebody coming to you. You wouldn't buy a car that way if somebody drove up to your house and said, I have a car for you and I have the best deal for you that's in town. Don't look anywhere else. You would say, well, something's a little squirrely here. I'm going to go to the marketplace and look at what the best deal is. I recommend that for anyone interested in the energy supply business as well.
Now, it seems lately when we're talking about energy and paying energy bills, the word privatization is coming up, and that makes the public, all of a sudden they're paying attention. The privatization of the utilities themselves?
Yeah, and so it's not as much coming up in the context of our natural gas or our electric distribution systems.
Yeah, what is driving that discussion?
Yeah, what's driving that discussion really is water and wastewater acquisitions. So there are two main large water and wastewater utilities in Pennsylvania. There's Aqua Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania American Water. And those two large investor-owned
Just two,
water,
they must be big.
They are pretty big. Now, there are thousands of local water companies. Let me just make that clear. And the vast majority of Pennsylvanians still get their water from their local municipal authority or their local township, right? But there are a growing number of individuals who get water and wastewater service from these two large investor-owned utilities. In 2016, there was a change in the law by the General Assembly that provided an incentive for these large investor-owned utilities to buy municipal authorities and municipalities' water systems. So the privatization that's being talked about is publicly owned drinking water and wastewater systems are being acquired by the investor-owned systems, sometimes for really good reasons. And I want to be clear, our office is kind of neutral on whether privatization itself is good or bad. We're not anti-privatization. The question really is at what cost? And that change in the law really inflated the costs that these acquisitions have come at, and all of those costs are paid for by ratepayers, by the consumers of these investor-owned utilities. And let me just give you a clear example. There have been 22 acquisitions approved by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission under this law, this fair market value law that has existed since 2016. And that law, of those 22 acquisitions, prior to that, they probably would have cost about $500 million for the utilities to buy. The utilities bought them for $1 billion. All $1 billion of that goes into the rate-making rate base of the utility, which is the basis upon which rates are set. And those acquisitions alone have cost ratepayers about $85 million more every year than they otherwise would have cost them had that law not existed.
So it sounds like you're saying this is fair market value versus actual value?
It's fair market value versus the value that is what is called depreciated original cost. It's a wonky little accounting term, but what that really means is what is that value of the system based on how much money has been put into it, less the depreciation over a period of time. And that's how utility valuation has happened for hundreds of years. This is supposed to be a proxy for what that system would sell at on a competitive level. And that's, again, not how we've done it in the context of these natural monopolies, which are water and wastewater systems or electric and natural gas systems. So in the water and wastewater context, it's a way for these municipalities to get out of providing the services. They may want to sell for any variety of legitimate reasons. They don't want to be in that anymore. And it's an incentive for the water companies and wastewater companies to buy them. The problem is because all of the money for that sale is paid for by ratepayers as opposed to shareholders, the water and wastewater utilities are writing checks from somebody else's checkbook. And when you're doing that, I think you should have a limitation on some of those costs and not just write checks that are pretty excessive. The difference between $1 billion and $500 million. They've paid 2 times what they otherwise should have paid for them, in my judgment.
Well, this sounds like a fairly technical situation, Patrick.
It is.
So as far as the bottom line for consumers is concerned, what's your opinion there?
The bottom line for consumers is this framework is costing consumers $85 million more every year as a result of fair market value rate making.
I wonder what that works out to per ratepayer.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to tell because it depends on how much usage they have. But what I can tell you is that the water and wastewater rates for a typical consumer for Pennsylvania American Water and Aqua, if you get both of your services from them, both water and wastewater, range anywhere between $1,500 and $2,000 a year, which is a significant amount of money, significantly higher than it otherwise was, 5-6 years ago. And increasingly, households are paying more for their water and wastewater service than they're paying for electricity and a way to heat their home. And that's a troubling concern for our office.
Patrick, do you keep your eye on pending legislation out there? There are bills on Capitol Hill right at this moment, and you've thought to yourself, this is good or bad for consumers?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, what's out there right now that is maybe troubling you?
Well, what's out there right now that is troubling me is, and it's good and bad. There's some bills out there on community solar, which I think is
We'll try to do both.
Okay. Community solar has some positive benefits, but I have some concerns about some of the bills that are out there that would shift costs to ratepayers. That's a concern of mine. In other words, community solar would allow for people who don't have access to rooftop solar to kind of buy into a community garden of solar. And that makes a lot of sense. It's really good to generate local jobs.
I've seen solar panel farms on the roadside.
Absolutely, absolutely. And some of those would be able to be, if they were being built now under the protections of this bill, would be able to put into the distribution system, and people could subscribe to it, almost like they subscribe to a CSA, a community-supported agriculture model or something of that nature. The problem is that the excess costs, the unsubscribed costs, get paid for by other ratepayers. And so if there's not a close connection between how much energy is being bought and sold and how many subscribers buy, then all the other ratepayers pay for this. So it'll be a little bit like the community garden saying to everybody, hey, you got to pay your share even if you don't want this produce, as opposed to the people who are buying the produce making sure they take it all. So that bill concerns me a little bit. Some of the good bills that are out there are some bills to rein in some of that fair market value that I discussed.
Yes.
Some of those would put caps on how much of it can be put into the rates of consumers, which we support. Some of them would look at full-out repeal of that statute and go back to the way it used to be. That would be our number one preference. But
have you attended hearings on that subject?
Yes, I've testified both in the House and the Senate on both of those issues within the last 6 weeks, in fact. So I anticipate there'll be some additional action going on in this legislative session on those issues.
Let's go back to solar power just for a minute and consider what I consider a micro example. Let's say I drive past someone's house, as I often do, and I see solar panels mounted on their roof. And my question often is, I wonder how big the impact is on reducing their energy bill by using the sun.
It could be significant, right? Depends on the installation and the household's usage, right? Whether they have a heating load or just a cooling load. And obviously the direction that the solar panels are facing. Southward facing is always the best, and most of the installers are...
Oh, is that right? So some solar panels are more efficient than others because of the direction they're facing?
Well, the direction matters because, when you're facing south, you get the sun all day because it rises in the east and sets in the west.
You got to keep track of those things.
So yeah, you got to keep track of those things. And so the systems themselves are pretty good at calibrating usage, and they should be installed based on your load profile, right? Based on how much you use, how much roof space you have, and again, kind of what your energy profile is. I think the important thing to understand... I suppose you need a minimum area in order to have an effect on your home. Your roof has to be a certain size to make it worth it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yes, and it has to not only has to be a certain size, it has to have structural integrity necessary to kind of hold this,
support the weight
up. And so this is one of the reasons why we have things like community solar, because not everybody can have access to that. Renters, people in multifamily housing. If you don't own your house, you don't have the right to put solar panels on it. But it can have a significant impact, and the solar industry is growing in Pennsylvania, and for many households, this makes a lot of sense. What I would say, though, is there are differences in terms of the structure. You can lease and or buy those. Now, none of that is governed by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, but it's governed by general sales contracts. And so like everything else, be careful if someone's knocking on your door trying to sell you something. Do your research and do your homework on those solar panels as well.
Here's something else that's easy to think about that you see on the landscape, not every day, but once in a while, if you're going down the turnpike, for example, there is windmills. Large windmills. So that makes me think again, just how much, what's their contribution to the alternative energy portfolio, I'll call it?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania has an alternative energy portfolio standards, which requires all electric utilities and all of those competitive suppliers to provide a certain amount of their energy through alternative energy sources, whether that's wind or solar. And so those big windmills that, out there in Somerset and western Pennsylvania, typically, they are interconnected to the wholesale side of it. So, it's not necessarily the local utility that's buying it. It could be a utility anywhere. They're making a significant difference. I don't know offhand, sitting here today, what percentage of our energy is generated by wind. It is a very, very small amount. Overall, renewables in general are a very small amount of our load profile in Pennsylvania. They are growing, but they're still a pretty small amount. But yes, generally speaking, with regard to the requirement under AEPS, we're required to get 18% of our energy from alternative sources. Now, some of that is not alternative sources that you would imagine. Some of it's like waste coal or biomass products, not just sun, solar, and wind.
And what's an example of a biomass product?
Well, it could be wood pellets or bulk wood that is kind of like debris that comes from various facilities. Could be methane gas from trash, as well as from landfill gas. All of those are considered to be alternative energy sources, qualified under the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act.
Patrick, we just have a couple minutes left in our program,
Sure.
and sometimes people don't know that there's help out there, and I'm hoping we can help you with awareness as far as what your office is doing. So tell me, how are you in touch with the public? In other words, are you raising awareness that you're out there and you're helping them?
Oh, absolutely. And so what I would say is anybody can reach out to our office anytime and, give us a call or send us an email, and we can connect you to resources. We're in the winter, and so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about LIHEAP a little bit, which is the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. This is a grant program that is administered by the Department of Human Services. And provides grants for heating assistance. You don't have to be behind on your bill. You just have to meet the income qualifications. Those income qualifications are at or below 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $25,000.
That helps.
For a family. The grants are $300 to $1,000 depending on your income and household size. You also can get a crisis grant, which is in addition to that if you are behind on your bill, to help you get caught up. And for folks whose furnace isn't
Emphasis on the word grant, you don't have to pay it back.
You don't have to pay it back. It is not a loan. It is money that is available to you if you're struggling with home heating this winter or if you meet those income guidelines. If your furnace is broken or inoperable, they have a furnace repair and replacement program through that as well. As do all of the utilities, both the electric and gas utilities, have programs to assist households, whether it's the payment arrangements that I talked about. Very low-income households at that same income level are entitled to something called the Customer Assistance Program, which allows them to have a reduced bill and freezes any arrearages that they owe. So there's lots of information available out there. I would urge you to reach out to utilities as well as our office.
Patrick Cicero, Pennsylvania's consumer advocate, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.